okay. Since there was some echo, thank you, Mary. And I'm delighted and honored to present our speaker for the keynote address for the Rovin Forum, Professor Liza Feldman Barrett, who is a University Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Director of the Interdisciplinary Affective Science Laboratory at Northeastern University. She also holds a research appointment at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. And she is a highly awarded scholar and writer. We simply don't have time to go over and recount all of the list, the entire list of her awards and honors. It's head spinning, just reading it. She's among, I'll just mention, she's among the top 1% most cited scientists in the world for her revolutionary research in psychology and neuroscience. Has offered over 240 peer-reviewed scientific papers, as well as several academic volumes for experts published by Guildford Press. And Professor Feldman Barrett has also done immensely making her work accessible to broader readership in her best-selling books such as How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain, and a recent 7.5 lessons about the brain, for which she was named a Guggenheim Fellow in her TED Talks and other public appearances. Her pioneering research, in brief, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, focuses on how the human brain, in continual conversation with the human body and the world, regulates the body and creates mental events such as episodes of emotion. Her account of the structure and function of the brain as predictive rather than reactive has revolutionized our understanding of emotion and has far-reaching ramifications, not just in the field of psychology and neuroscience, but on linguistics, anthropology, the history and philosophy of emotions. The last time I heard Professor Feldman Barrett talk was in a conference of the American Academy of Religion in the States, in a Buddhist philosophy panel, in which her account of the way concepts are involved in the creation of emotions and of our perception, and some interesting and mind-blowing affinities with Buddhist philosophy and other Indian strands of thought. Her keynote talk today will be about what brain evolution reveals about human nature. Please join me in welcoming her to town. We are very honored and happy to have her with us. Thank you. So the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for that very kind introduction. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Chag Sameach and greetings from Boston, where it is surprisingly sunny today. Doesn't happen very often in December in Boston. Today, I'm going to give you a very high-level summary of some of the essays in my new book. So for the neuroscientists in the audience, I just want to tell you there's no data here, not a single data slide, although I'm very, very happy to talk about the data behind any of these insights, some of which come from my own lab, but some of which come from other very important labs around the world. And so I've deliberately kept it short today. Brevity is not my strong suit as a general rule, but I've tried to keep the talk very high level and really, so at the level of ideas, and keep it short so that there's a lot of time for discussion, because the essays in this book tend to really generate quite a bit of discussion. So I'm gonna share my screen now, and let's just see what is the issue. So I'm not seeing all of my screens connected, which is a challenge. Okay, let me try this again and see if I can get it to work. I'm not sure what the problem is, but I'm not seeing all of my screens. Let's see. Huh. Yeah. So the problem I'm looking at, which has never occurred before, is that the screen where I would project my slides, I have 3 screens in front of me and only one of them is showing up. You can't see the video because I haven't started it yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to, there's a problem with the screen share that I have not encountered before. If somebody, maybe Mary, let me just see what I can do.
You are a co-host, so there shouldn't be a problem.
I know, but when you, what do you see?
Right now, nothing. Well, a lot of Zoom windows, but not your screen.
Yeah, for whatever reason, and that I don't completely understand, the screen share is not picking up one of my screens. It's not allowing me to share. And there's a whiteboard. There's a, yeah, it's just not. Let me try one other thing and see if I can fix it. Not sure what the problem is.
We had something for
yeah, it's, yeah. The problem is it's not picking up the screen that I need to display the images on.
Sometimes if you have too many screens open, then there's an option to ask it to show you more screens. So, you know, when you do the share screen, you might not see your screens because you have a lot of other screens open. And
yeah.
then you have the options to ask them for more screens, and then maybe the screens will come up.
Right. Well,
but do you want us to send me maybe the file and I'll try to see?
No, that's okay. That won't work actually. Yeah, I've never ever.
Okay, we have something.
What are you seeing now?
The whiteboard.
The whiteboard. Okay.
The whiteboard.
It's funny because I don't actually have a whiteboard.
Maybe restarting.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually. Yeah, I'm gonna hop off and hop on again and hope that will fix the problem. Okay. Thank you for bearing with me. I will be back momentarily.
בהחלט יש כאן לקח חשוב לכולנו לקראת כנסים ואירועים אחרים. אף פעם אי אפשר לעשות פחות מדי חזרות ולוודא שהכל מחובר והכל עובד. חוקי מרפי תמיד עובדים.
הכי טוב היה עם שקפים ומקרן.
איפה הימים שכתבנו בגיר על הלוח, אז באמת שום דבר לא מנע מאיתנו. כן, יש אקו. אם יש לך אוזניות, אז תוכל אולי להתחבר וזה יהיה הטוב ביותר, כי זה יקלוט ישירות ממך ולא מהחלל.
Ay, ay, ay. I just have never seen anything like this. It's very, very, very concerning. Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and do my best because I can't. I've given talks, like 100 talks basically on Zoom, and this has never ever happened before. So
maybe you can send the send it to someone else.
No, we can see it now.
What do you see now?
We can see it.
We see the presenter. We see the presenter view.
Yeah. Okay, let me try one other thing then. Great. Very good. Okay, well,
maybe she can send the slides to someone else.
it's not possible. It's really not possible. Everything is, first of all, it's the slideshow is like 400 megabytes large, and because of all the animations, and the timing is down to the second. So
Lisa, can you look at your sharing options? Maybe it's because we're co-hosts, so we should go for all participants can share, and then you can.
It's possible. I mean, what I've been doing is playing around with the arrangement of the screens to see how I can get this to work. But it's really
Roy, maybe if you make her host, not co-host, it might help.
Okay, let's try and do that. Nick, will you, Professor Feldman to host and we'll be the host? Okay.
Yes.
Could you try?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
I suggest we start and we'll see whether the infrastructure decides to cooperate later on.
All right, let's try one more time. Luckily, I have, I'm just gonna go get my husband who's a computer scientist. So I'm supposed to be giving this keynote with all of these very patient people waiting. Okay. And for whatever reason, I cannot get this screen for the first time in the existence of Zoom since I've used it. This screen will not show as a choice to share. So I can't display my slides. Anytime I show my slides, what they see is the presenter view and not the actual slides. And I can't arrange the windows. For whatever reason, both my extra windows are not showing. It's only this one. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so then I thought, have you ever seen anything like this before? Dan, where the windows don't show up? Usually we turn on the display system. So the arrangement is as it always is. I put it back because I couldn't get it to work with any of the others. This one here is my laptop. This one here is this screen, and this one here is this screen. I shut the microphone off. I took my headphones off. I don't really know what the problem is. It's not an issue with Keynote, honey. It's an issue with the Zoom not reading. Zoom is the problem, right? The Zoom settings. Yes, I can. See what happens. Okay. No. In fact, now it's not even, no, that didn't, that actually made things worse. That's what people are seeing. So no, people aren't seeing anything except me. They see me, and I'm trying to share my screen. And
you're not getting any option to share an entire screen, just windows. So something that we change in the meeting.
Hold on. What do you see now?
You see a computer and the screensaver, right?
What about now?
The display in color.
Pardon me?
The display in color menu.
But do you see anything different now?
No, we don't.
Okay. That's funny because I thought I just, all right, let's turn off the display.
Perhaps we can start,
yeah, this here. All right, let me try one more thing. I think I have figured out what I can do to make this work. I have to put this here, I believe, and then I need to go here, here. Now what do you see? Hello?
Many thanks to Roy. So.
Okay, that did not work. Fuck.
Disappeared.
Oh my God. Well, what was I saying about feeling grateful? I'm gonna really have to work hard right now to make that work.
But we did see your PowerPoint presentation now, right?
You saw only you saw the presenter slides. What I'm having trouble showing you are the actual slides.
Oh, then have you tried to go to set up slideshow in the PowerPoint program?
It's not PowerPoint, it's Keynote. And I have to tell you, the problem isn't with Keynote. The problem is with Zoom. The problem is that Zoom is refusing to read one of my screens. I can't share one of my screens with you. And I am trying to I'm trying to work it out to present the slides on a different screen, but it's just not working.
So let me
put the slides up.
Okay,
the slides
are. We try to all.
Hold on. Let me. My husband's just giving me one more thing to try. So what do you want me to do?
Why don't you just go to a one screen? Can you go to a one screen setup?
No, I can't actually.
Why don't you try presenting on this screen? Put your notes over there. Put your presenting here. Whichever screen, which screen is actually showing to the people? This one?
Right now, sweetie, it's right. Okay, so here it is. Okay, if I do it here, it's still, they're still going to see this. For whatever reason, okay, this is still.
Switch these two.
I don't know how to do that.
Liza, maybe logging out would work. Maybe we can all just log out and log in again and try and see whether it solves the problem.
It only will present. It won't work. It's just not working.
How does Keynote determine where it's putting?
I don't know that.
Could you try?
No, I'm sorry. I've just never experienced anything like this ever. So I don't.
And I understand, but could you perhaps log in and log out and log in again? Maybe it will sort something out, and if not, we'll proceed as is.
Yeah. Can I just ask one question? Let me just try. Yeah. Yes, but what do you see now?
What brain evolution reveals the C slide?
Is this the face slide with my name and the?
Your affiliation. Yes.
Okay, and now what happened?
It crumbles down.
Great, that's it. It's working.
Okay.
Yeah, great. I have no idea what I just did, but
it worked.
But it worked. So, okay. Well, I'm going to give you a talk about how your brain controls the systems of your body. Right now, the systems of my body are a little activated. I will thank you for your patience and start the talk. Our actual story begins a long time ago when the world was ruled by creatures who didn't have brains. And across the expanse of evolutionary time, and with the innovations that come from trial and errors and the deaths of trillions of animals, you ended up with one of the most fascinating objects that evolution ever created, a 3-pound blob between your ears that makes you human. How did this happen? And what does our brain evolution story tell us about human nature? So our story begins 550 million years ago, give or take, well before the Cambrian period. When the world was ruled by creatures like this one called an Amphioxus. Amphioxus is about 5 centimeters long. It has no head, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no heart, no lungs, and no brain. I call it a stomach on a stick. If you were a little Amphioxus, you would plant yourself in the seafloor like a blade of grass and wait for smaller creatures to drift into your mouth. But you wouldn't be able to see these creatures or hear them or taste them. And when the food supply ran low, you'd pick yourself up, propel yourself to some other spot randomly, which would probabilistically have more food. If we fast forward some millions of years to the Cambrian period, when creatures became able to sense the presence of other creatures, something miraculous happened. One creature deliberately ate another creature, and hunting transformed animals into predators and prey and launched an evolutionary arms race where animals evolved to move better with greater senses for sensing things at a distance, and bodies got larger, and new bodily systems evolved to shuttle nutrients and waste, allowing animals to become much more powerful swimmers and accordingly, much more successful predators. Fast forward, what we see is that with the arrival of greater senses, the most critical question in existence became, is this blob good to eat, or will this thing eat me? This is a question of movement, and movement ultimately is a question of value, because moving requires energy, which is a limited resource. And the right movement might get you a big reward or avoid something life-threatening. The wrong movement will have you waste energy that you might need later. So energy efficiency, getting good value for the resources that you spend, is a key to survival, and it's actually a major evolutionary selection pressure in natural selection. You can think about energy efficiency kind of like a budget. Now, a financial budget tracks money as it's earned and spent. A budget for your body similarly tracks resources like water and salt and glucose as you gain them and lose them. So each action that spends resources, such as swimming, is like a withdrawal from your account. And actions that replenish your resources, such as eating and sleeping, are like deposits. This is a simplified explanation, I admit, but it captures the key idea that running a body full of systems for your heart, your lungs, your immune system, your metabolism, so on, requires biological resources. I think someone has their microphone on and I can hear a baby crying in the background. So I'm not sure if that person wants to turn their microphone, mute themselves. Creatures before the Cambrian period had just a handful of body budgeting cells at the tips of their body that will control their bodily systems. These were neurons. But as hunting drove animals to evolve bigger bodies with more systems to maintain, body budgeting required a more sophisticated command center. We call that command center a brain. So brains evolved to control the systems of your body using a body budget, essentially. Now, your command center is miraculous. Right now, as you're listening to these words, your brain is supervising a tremendous number of organs and systems in your
You are on mute.
Lisa, you're muted.
You are muted, Lisa.
Yes, I realize that. I did not mute myself. I did not touch my computer. So someone else muted me and I just unmuted myself. Thank you for telling me. Right. So right now, as I'm speaking these words and you're listening to these words, each of us has a brain that is supervising a tremendous number of organs and systems. And this biological symphony runs nonstop for your entire life, unless something goes wrong when you become largely aware of what's going on. So basically, no matter what you're doing, there's a whole symphony going on inside your body that you're unaware of, which remains, and you remain unaware of it largely until something goes wrong. Like, you know, something physical happens where you're not well, or maybe you're trying to give a talk and it's not working very well, so you can hear your heart pounding in your ears. Yeah. It's just going to be a calamity of today of slides. Okay. So your brain's most important job is not thinking. It's not feeling. It's not even seeing or hearing or tasting or smelling. Your brain's most important job is running a little worm body that got very, very complicated. And everything that your brain thinks and feels and sees and imagines is in the service of regulating the systems of your body. Now, you and I don't experience ourselves that way. We don't experience every thought, every feeling of happiness or awe or joy, every hug we give or receive, every kindness we extend, every insult we bear as a deposit or a withdrawal in a metabolic budget. But under the hood, that is exactly what's happening. So what's the best way to run a body budget? The answer is by prediction or anticipation. The core task of all brains on this planet is to regulate the organism's internal milieu, that means the systems of the body, by anticipating the needs of the body and preparing to satisfy those needs before they arise. This fancy name for body budgeting, the technical name is called allostasis. And why is prediction the best way to run a body? Well, the best way to keep a financial budget solvent, as you know from personal experience, is to avoid surprises, to anticipate what your financial needs are and to try to meet those needs before they arise. The same is true for running a body budget. When it comes to body budgeting, prediction beats reaction for many reasons, not the least of which is it's much more metabolically efficient. All brains in every animal on this planet predict the needs of their body and attempt to meet those needs before they arise. So all brains budget by prediction. Now, typically predictions run automatically and they're very unconscious, but we can witness them at play. And so I'm going to give you a demonstration to try to show this to you. So right now, as you're looking at this image of black and white blobs, billions of neurons in your brain are trying to make sense of this visual information. Your brain is searching through a lifetime of past experience, issuing thousands of guesses at once, weighing probabilities, trying to answer the question, what is this most like? Not what is this, but what is this most like? And it's all happening in the blink of an eye. So if you are still just seeing black and white blobby images, then your brain hasn't found a good match. And you are in a state called experiential blindness. That is, you just see visual noise. And so now I'm going to cure your blindness. And I'll just do this again. So many of you now may see a bee. Why? Because now when your brain searches through your past experiences, there's new information there from the color photograph that you just saw. And that knowledge changes how you experience these blobs right now. Your brain is constructing the image of a bee, even though there is no bee present on the screen. So what you're experiencing is a combination of what's on the screen and the predictions that are inside your head. And we have a name for this in science. We call it a hallucination because this kind of hallucination is business as usual for your brain. Philosophers sometimes call this controlled hallucination. In fact, every experience that you have in your whole life is caused by some combination of what's inside your head, your brain's predictions, and what's outside your head. To understand how this works, we're going to take your brain's perspective for a moment. For your whole life, your brain is trapped inside a dark, silent box called your skull. Your brain is always receiving information from your senses, information about what's going on around you in the world, from light waves and chemicals and changes in air pressure. And information is also coming continuously from inside your own body. This information is what scientists call sense data, and it's ambiguous. It can have many different causes. Now, your brain doesn't have access to the causes. It only has access to the outcomes. So how does your brain figure out what the causes are? This is what we call a reverse inference problem. Sometimes it's called an inverse inference problem. So for example, imagine that you heard a really loud bang. What does that bang mean? What caused it? Your brain has to solve a reverse inference problem in the midst of uncertainty to keep you alive and well. And your life may depend on your ability, on your brain's ability to guess well, to predict well. Your brain uses what it has available to solve this reverse inference problem, which is the past experiences that it can reassemble, re-implement in the communication between its own neurons. So in the blink of an eye, your brain reconstructs bits and pieces of past experiences, assembling them into memories, inferring the meaning of sense data and what caused it, and therefore what you should do about it. So that loud bang might be a clap of thunder, or fireworks, or a car backfiring, or even a gunshot. At every moment, your brain is asking itself, figuratively speaking, the last time I encountered similar sense data in the present to what's happening in the present moment, and my body was in a similar state, what did I do next? What did I see next? What did I feel next? And then your brain begins to construct those experiences. The answer that your brain provides doesn't have to be a perfect match for the situation, just something close enough to give your brain an appropriate plan of action that helps you survive and maybe even thrive. And the same thing works with sensations from your own body. So you might feel a tightness in your chest. Well, your brain asks, what does it mean? What caused it? Could it be that you're nervous? Do you have indigestion? Could this be the beginnings of a heart attack? Your brain is always using past experience to guess. This is what your brain does all the time, automatically and effortlessly. It is the operating principle of your brain. Let me give you another example of how this works. So I'll wager that you've never actually seen electrical towers playing jump rope before, but you can understand what's happening because your brain is able to combine bits and pieces of past experience to make meaning out of this completely novel image. This is what psychologists call conceptual combination, and it's what neuroscientists call generativity, the ability to generate something new out of bits and pieces of old. This illusion also demonstrates another really cool thing about the way that your brain predicts. Perhaps you can hear the towers as they hit the ground. Perhaps some of you can feel the thudding in your chest. If you can, that's because your brain is changing the firing of its own neurons. And that's what brains do when they make a prediction. So when your brain assembles past experience to make sense of the visual sense data on the screen, it's predicting what you will hear and what you will feel by changing the firing of its own neurons to prepare those sensations. prepare you to experience them. So when we say prediction, we don't mean an abstract thought. Your brain is modulating the firing of its own neurons to anticipate light waves and chemicals and other sense data before they actually hit your brain. And this is also true for the moment-to-moment changes in your body. Your brain prepares to receive them before the sense data arrive from your organs and hormones and various bodily systems. And so the purpose of sense data is not to stimulate the brain. It's to help control the predictions. The sense data either confirm the predictions or modify them. And we have a fancy name for that modification. We call it learning. Think about the last time you were thirsty and drank a glass of water. Within seconds of the last drop, you probably felt less thirsty. The interesting thing is that it takes about 20 minutes for water to reach your bloodstream before it gets to your brain. So what relieved your thirst? Well, the answer is prediction. So as you drink the water, your brain is executing the actions that allow you to drink. At the same time, it's simultaneously, at the same time, preparing predictions that anticipate the sensory consequences of gulping that water, causing you to feel less thirsty long before the water actually has any effect on your blood and reaches your brain. Because your brain knows from past experience that drinking water usually leads to quenching of thirst. And so your brain does not wait. It predicts your experience and starts to construct it rather than reacting to the events in your body. So your brain is continually talking to itself from the moment that you're born until the moment that you die. And those conversations are predictions about what to do next, and as a consequence, what you will experience next. Now, predictions don't appear out of nowhere. Your brain assembles them from bits and pieces of the past that you yourself have experienced, or that you've heard about, or that you've read about, or that you've watched. If you could magically reach back in time and change your past, your brain would predict differently today, and you might act differently and experience the world differently as a result. You might be a different person. But it's impossible really to go back and change your past. But with some effort, you can change how your brain will predict in the future. So you can invest a little time and energy to create new experiences for yourself, which will send your brain on predicting on a completely different trajectory. You can try new activities. You can even learn new ideas. Every experience you cultivate and everything you learn right now is an investment that seeds your brain to predict differently in a moment from now, and therefore act differently. So in a sense, you know, moving your body, the two most expensive things your brain can do is move your body or learn something new. And you can think about these as expenditures in a body budget that have the possibility of a return on your investment. And that is kind of a big deal, because it means that you are more responsible for your actions and your experiences than you might think. So sure, your brain is automatically predicting and it's automatically generating your actions, the action plans and your experiences. But you still have some responsibility for those automatic predictions, more than you might want even. Because in this very moment, as in every moment, your brain is cultivating your past as a means of controlling your future. Sometimes we're responsible for something, not because we're to blame, but because we're the only ones who can change it. And so by changing what you pay attention to now and the experiences that you deliberately cultivate with effort, with energy from your body budget, you can change the way your brain predicts tomorrow. In every moment, your brain cultivates your past as a means of controlling who you will become in the future. Now, this story of brain evolution may seem different to you than the one that you may know. Maybe you've heard the story of the human brain evolving an ancient inner layer inherited from reptiles that contains your most basic urges. And supposedly wrapped around this lizard brain, this reptile brain, is a middle layer, your so-called limbic system. Limbic just means layer, that is the layer of tissue around the parts around your lizard brain. This limbic system supposedly was inherited from ancient mammals and supposedly contains the circuits for emotion. And the outermost layer is called the neocortex, neo for new, and it's said to house the circuitry for thinking and rationality, those supposedly human, uniquely human cognitive abilities that regulate your inner beast. This idea of a mind at war with itself, with the brain as a battleground between emotion and reason for control of your behavior, can be traced all the way back to Plato and is one of the most cherished beliefs that we have about what it means to be human. Essentially, it's a morality tale. It's a tale of when your rationality doesn't control your inner beast, you're either immoral or you are sick, mentally ill. Unfortunately, this view here, this story, is actually a myth. And scientists have known that it's a myth since the 1970s based on genetic evidence. Now, you would not know that necessarily because the newspapers and magazines and even textbooks are filled with this myth. It's a very, very compelling myth. Most legal systems are based on this, this myth. Our understanding of economics is also based on this myth. I mean, there's a lot riding on this particular story of brain evolution, but it's wrong. Based on the genetic evidence, we know that all mammals and probably all vertebrates share exactly the same neurons, and brains are built by exactly the same brain plan. But the stages of building a brain run for different lengths of time. And so you get more or fewer neurons. And so to the naked eye, the brains look different in different animals, but actually what's happening is that over evolutionary time, brains are reorganizing as they grow. So on the outside, they look different, but when you peer into the molecular structure of the genetics, the neurons are actually the same. So if all mammals and maybe even all vertebrates have exactly the same neurons and exactly the same brain plan, then what makes the human brain capable of creating complex cultures and building civilizations in a way that no other animal can? This is a complicated question with probably a very complicated answer, but a key idea is that the human brain, when surrounded by a chorus of other human brains, allow us to make things up that become real. For example, humans have made up something called money. Now, money is real. It's a special kind of real that we call social reality. To create social reality, we impose a function on physical reality, like pieces of paper or metal discs. We make up this function, like here, trading for material goods. We agree on the function as a group. We give it a name, like currency, and we communicate about it, and then the function becomes real. So we impose function on something that thing just doesn't have by its physical nature. And we all agree that it has that function, and then poof, it has that function. Social reality even lets us impose functions on things that are completely invisible. Oh, sorry. That are completely invisible, like the empty space above a building. I love this one. We impose a function on this empty space called air rights. And humans sell air rights to other humans who then own this empty space. This kind of ability to create reality is uniquely human. Here's another example. The color spectrum, the spectrum of light, visible light, or at least visible to a human retina. Color is continuous, but people in a culture draw lines in the continuum to define discrete colors. These lines are made up, but within a culture, people agree that the discrete colors are real, and they act on these colors in distinctive ways. No English-speaking human who has 3 cones in their retina, so normal functioning retina, would ever confuse purple and blue. But these wavelengths are part of the same color category in other cultures, because cultures draw boundaries differently on this continuous spectrum, and they treat those boundaries as real. The color of skin also is a continuum from very light to very dark. Skin color reveals something about where your ancestors lived in relation to the sun, and evolved from a tug of war between 2 vitamins. If your skin absorbs too much light, so your skin is too light for where you live, that will destroy folic acid and you'll die. If your skin does not absorb enough light, that is, your skin is too dark to absorb light for where you live, then you won't produce enough vitamin D and you'll die. So the tug of war between these 2 vitamins is the selection pressure that influences the genes for skin tone. But humans long dead drew dividing lines in this continuum and imposed a meaning on skin tone that it did not evolve to have. And today, in many countries, we live with the consequences of these lines that advantage one group of people at the expense of another. So skin tone is physically real, but the lines which divide racial groups are socially real. And while race may be social reality, the assignment of one group to one group or another has very, very real physical consequences for the people in those groups. Social reality occurs when we draw lines in the sand and we create new countries with citizens and immigrants. And there are lots and lots and lots of examples of this, really, in almost every civilization, of the way in which humans create social reality together. Now, you and I create social reality with other people without even trying, because we have human brains. And to the best of our knowledge, no other animal has this superpower. Scientists are still figuring out how our brains develop this capacity, but we suspect that it has something to do with a suite of abilities that I call the 5 C's. And actually, I'll just mention, there's a 6th C that I did not put in the book because it was too complicated to explain in a small essay. And I'm happy to talk about what that is in the question and answer period. But the first C that I'll talk about is creativity. The creativity that permits us to make art and to make music also lets us draw a line in the dirt and call it the border of a country. The second C is communication. We communicate efficiently with other brains in order to share our creative ideas, such as the idea of a country and its borders. For humans, communication usually means symbols like language. The third C is copying, also called social learning. Humans learn by reliably copying one another in order to establish laws and norms that allow us to predict one another's behavior, which is much easier on our body budgets. So ambiguity and uncertainty, particularly coming from another human source, is really, really hard on a body budget. Chaos is really, really hard on a body budget, and predictability is much, metabolically speaking, much cheaper. Which I should say, if we talk about that, takes us off into a discussion about the seductive lure of authoritarianism. The fourth C is cooperation, often on a vast geographic scale. And when we put all of these together, these 4 C's, with the genetic changes that gave our species a big complex brain, we have the basic ingredients for creating social reality. Now, because we have a big complex brain, and because there have been some genetic changes in particular parts of the brain, our brains also have a 5th capacity, a 5th C, called compression, which is a special way that brains create summaries of information. So I can't really go into the details in this short talk, but compression lets us think abstractly and really endows us with the ability to create another C, and that is concepts, which I'm happy to talk about in the question and answer period. You know, other animal brains can compress too, but they can't do it with the same sort of pervasiveness and power that human brains can, right? So, so we can understand concepts abstractly. We can understand things abstractly. We can see similarities in things that aren't physically similar to one another because they're similar in their function. Now, each of the 5 C's has been found in other animals to varying extents. Crows, for example, are creative problem solvers who use twigs. Elephants communicate in low rumbles that can travel for miles. Whales copy one another's songs in really remarkable ways. Ants cooperate to find food and defend their nests. Bees use abstraction as they wiggle their behinds to tell their hive mates where to find nectar. But in humans, the 5 C's intertwine and reinforce one another, which lets us take things to a whole other level. We're not just modifying a reality that exists, we're actually adding to that reality. Because we can think abstractly, we can impose new functions on things and create reality. We can take things that are physically different in the physical world and understand that at various times in human history, all of these things served a similar function. And as far as we know, humans are the only animals who have the brains with enough capacity for compression and abstraction to create social reality. Now, social reality is an incredible gift. We can simply make stuff up. We can invent different customs and laws. And if other people treat them as real, then they become real. But even social reality has its limits, right? I mean, it's constrained by physical reality. We could agree that we can walk through walls, but that wouldn't make it happen. We could all agree that we could eat ground glass as food, but that wouldn't make it palatable or possible to actually digest glass. Or we could all agree that a virus isn't contagious and therefore we don't have to wear masks. But a virus doesn't care what we believe. Anyone with a nice wet set of lungs can be a suitable host. Social reality is a human superpower. But as we know from comic books and stories, superpower works best when you know that you have it and you wield it wisely. Now, because of the time constraints today, I'm not going to talk about a couple of other lessons in 7.5 lessons. The fact that humans have the kind of nature that requires nurture. Asking questions about genes versus environment is just a meaningless question because in order for a brain to develop normally, we have the kind of genes that require input from the world, particularly social input, in order to grow a brain healthy and whole. We are also the caretakers of each other's nervous systems. This is what it means to be a social animal. Your brain does not regulate only your body. Your brain also regulates other people's bodies and they return the favor. And we can do this with words, actually, because of the way that our brains are structured. And when it comes to the human species, as for all animal species, variation is the norm. Humans love variation. We love variation in clothes. We love variation in food. We love variation in all kinds of things, except maybe when it comes to each other. And this is something else that I discuss in my book. So if you want to know more about these lessons, you can have a look at the book. You can go to my website. This book also has an extensive set of web notes with scientific references to back up all of the scientific points discussed. And with that, I will thank you for your extraordinary patience in listening to the talk and waiting for the talk to begin.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm sure that there are numerous questions, and I invite everyone, especially our students, to note in the chat whether you have a question. And I'll take the privilege of asking the first question. Well, if you can unmute our friends. I would like to ask you about being a historian. I would like to ask you, as coming from psychology, what you think about history of emotions. When we historians think that, well, emotions are generated not just in the brain, but they are also the product of culture, they are historically constructed, or using your notion about using experience. So emotions are not just the product of our individual experience, it's also the product of our communal experience as a community sometime during the past, historical past, not the evolutionary past. What do you think about how we historians take your understanding of the brain and then we start playing with it?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. So one of the lessons I didn't talk about was, because there wasn't really time, even if the talk had gone well, there wouldn't have been time, which is that, you know, infant brains are not miniature adult brains. They're brains that are waiting for a set of wiring instructions from the world. And the wiring instructions come from the physical world, but they also come from the social world. And so what does this mean? This means that evolution has set us up to be able to transmit cultural information, historical information from one generation to the next and wire it into the brains of our children very seamlessly, actually. So we cultivate the environment that our, you know, infants' brains wire themselves, children's brains wire themselves to their world. The adults cultivate that world for them. And so essentially we have brains that allow for cultural inheritance of ideas. And so remember when I said that predictions and the concepts that come from them are not just based on your own personal experiences, they're also based on things that you read, things that you hear about, things that you've observed. And that includes the history that is endowed to you, that's displayed to you, that you participate in the cultural practices and norms that you participate in throughout your life. Similarly, you can go from, as an adult, you can move from one, or actually at any time in your life, you could move from one culture to another, and you will acculturate, which means that you would learn the cultural practices and norms, and often their historical meaning when you learn the emotion knowledge and you learn to make the emotions of the of that culture. So I think that this view is very, very consistent with the way that historians of emotion talk about emotion, the construction of emotion. I think the one place that I would just caution is that there's still, in the history of emotion that I'm familiar with, in the work that I'm familiar with, there's still a tendency to make a distinction between emotional or affective versus cognitive ingredients or components. And I think this is not helpful because that's a very Western distinction that doesn't exist in all parts of the world, right? So in the West, we have thoughts and feelings and we think we treat them as very, very different, but not everybody everywhere in the world actually conceives of or experiences their mental life in that way.
Thank you very much. And Sergey, you noted in the chat that you would like to ask, so go ahead.
My name is Sergey from East Asian Studies Department, and we're talking about the cultures, about civilizations, and I would ask more specific question. There are many famous people like Walter or Marx who advocated the idea that men make history, or that history is made by people. And can your research be relevant to the research on the decision making of important historical, by important historical figures? For example, why they made one decision or another? Because always when we read the history of great figures, great important historical individuals, we know they always can make one decision or another. Can your research be relevant to this field of study?
Well, I think it's very common I think it's common for scholars to create narratives about why people do the things they do. In fact, we do this with each other. So we do this for ourselves. We create narratives about why we did what we did. Our brains work very automatically, and we construct narratives to try to make sense of these automatic and somewhat stochastic processes. So it's very possible to do this with historical figures. What I will say is this, though, that in the study of brain evolution, it is possible to say what has changed. It's not really possible to say why. So we can analyze the decisions that historical figures make, but when we ask why they made those decisions, then we are in the land of speculation. But it's a land of speculation that evolutionary theorists are really quite comfortable with, because all why questions, which are teleological questions, why did certain things happen? We can say what happened and what the chain of events are, but we can't really say why. That's a guess. It's an educated guess, but it's a guess. And the same thing is true for history, looking at the decision-making of historical figures. So for example, we know, I think pretty well biologically, at a biological level, ambiguity and uncertainty is really hard on a human brain. Like, it's just metabolically costly. It's much more metabolically costly. And when you're allostatically disrupted, or you're running a body budget deficit, so you're spending more than you've got, that's really, really, really unpleasant. It feels unpleasant. So, think about the last time you exercised. You get to a certain point in the exercise and you start to really feel crappy because you're expending more energy now than you have easily available. And in the long run, that's a helpful thing to do, but in the moment, it doesn't always feel so good. So if you think about the dynamics of body budgeting, you can then take a look at democracies versus authoritarian government, like authoritarian meeting systems. One system, like one party system where everything is controlled for you and there's no ambiguity, or democracy, which is messy with a ton of ambiguity and uncertainty all the time, people arguing, many, many points of view. You can say, well, this kind of a system is much more metabolically costly for people than this one. Does that have anything to do with how people make decisions? I don't know. Am I reducing everything to metabolism? No, I'm just saying there's a factor, a biological factor, which no one has considered before, which is a major, major, major selection pressure, not just on individual animals in a species, but on an individual human in terms of what they think and do. But can we say that, that's the cause of anyone resorting or turning to authoritarianism versus democracy? We can't really say for sure, but we can speculate reasonably, I think. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you very much. And Emmanuel, your turn, please.
Hi, I'm super excited because I'm a big fan, so sorry if I will mumble. First of all, I want to thank you for your older book, How Emotions Are Made. It changed my life, and I realized that maybe it's a long story and not for here, but it released me for 30 years of depression because I realized that I'm eating wrong, and it makes me depressed and anxious all the time. So since I changed my diet after I was reading your book, and it really changed my life. So thank you for it. And thank you for Dr. Otsar that he told me about this book, and really okay. So because I'm excited, I'm gonna read my questions because I wrote them before. And okay, so the first thing, this a bit for a show off. I have a weekly meeting with Professor David Eagleman. I'm sure that maybe you know him.
I do indeed.
So I'm talking to him about Ulysses' contract, and I'm thinking about, when I was reading your book now before the meeting, I was thinking about Ulysses' contract and body budget. And my question is, if there is a chance that when someone have like chronic pains or his body budget is wrong, he will be like, it will be harder to fulfill the contract he did with himself. Like if your body can affect the way you just like, the way you do those contracts.
Yeah. So I think, the way to think about it is really that your brain is in constant conversation with your body. And your brain doesn't, because of this reverse inference issue, your brain doesn't actually know what's going on in your body. Your brain has predictions or beliefs about what's going on in your body. But your brain ultimately is the arbiter of your experience. It's what creates your experience. So for example, there's one form of, chronic pain, for example, if you've read in How Emotions Are Made, this is something I discussed, right? That the brain believes there's something wrong in the body because maybe there was something wrong. Maybe you had some tissue damage. There was no nociceptive input, as it's called, information about tissue damage that made it to the brain. The brain learned that, started making predictions and creating the experience of discomfort. And then as things healed, the brain never got the message. And so the brain believes that there's something wrong in the body, but there actually isn't anything wrong. It's not that the suffering is made up. I mean, it's not that the suffering isn't real. It's real. You feel it. It's just there's actually nothing wrong with your body. And so the treatment for that, right, would be you have to gently retrain your brain, basically. You have to give it information, prediction error in very small amounts, because remember what I said, the most expensive things your brain can do is move your body and learn something new. And so if you're already metabolically encumbered, or your brain believes you are, it's not going to learn very easily, right? Same thing with depression. There are really a number of ways to make it to a depressed state of being depressed. One is that you actually do have some kind of metabolic problem in your body, like maybe a mitochondrial dysfunction that actually is a metabolic problem, and your brain is modeling that and predicting that accurately. But another possibility is that some forms of depression are like chronic pain. At some point you had a problem with your body budget that was relieved, but the brain never learned that the situation changed from the body. And so, and if you're depressed enough, I mean, depression is kind of like a bankrupt body budget in a sense. You can't learn. It's very, very hard because your brain believes that you have no metabolic resources. So it's necessary to retrain the brain. So I would say any time there's a miscommunication, let's say, between the brain and the body, that can account for a lot of the experiences and symptoms that we that we give other names to. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually a lot of the things that, you know, David's new book, Lived Wired, which is a great book actually, you know, talks a lot about sensory processing, the processing of sensory substitution and sensory illusions that are exteroceptive, but there's a whole domain of interoceptive illusions that remain, I would say, unexplored to date. Yeah.
Thank you. I have much more to say, but I won't say it here, but thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. And Kunduz, you are next.
Hello, thank you. It was very interesting lecture, and I understood that your genesis of initial origin of human being is based basically on evolutionary assumptions that we are from animals, but to this I was a bit struggling, like there are a lot of cultures and nations whose histories mainly rely on some mystical and religious, spiritual foundations. So, and they, like even about Kyrgyz, we have anecdote actually, how Kyrgyz dies and comes to heaven, and God opens his brain and it's totally new, and God says you haven't yet used, so go back and use your brain to build democracy. So this kind of like jokes and etc. But I was just curious, like how do you like, or are you trying to explain anyhow not only social realities but spiritual reality? And if yes, like how do you define it? Because like if you read a lot of memoirs which were written like in the exile or in the refugee camps, like most of them were not eating well, completely exhausted, not having at all water, or even starving for years. But this, what they remember is that their belief and faith and spiritual whatsoever assumptions were holding them. So I was just curious on this regard, and thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm not sure that anything I'm going to say is going to satisfy your question, but here's what I would say. We are human brains, a bunch of human brains trying to understand how brains work. That's kind of an inherent problem, right? There's sort of a inherent conflicts of interest there. For many, many years, we understood evolution in a particular way, like as if it's an it's an ascending climb to the best. You know, it's called a phylogenetic scale. It means that evolution always is striving for some perfect form. And conveniently, we're at the top of that climb. So we're basically awarding ourselves the award for being best species. It's like we believed for many, many years that evolution kind of aimed itself at us because we're the best on the planet. And that's really, I mean, you know, the kinds of things we can do are pretty impressive, but other animals can do a lot of really other impressive things too that we can't, like, you know, carry 50 pounds, 50 times their body weight, for example, or grow back new limbs. These are things, climb up walls. Like these are abilities that we give to superheroes in Western culture. But essentially what science is doing, evolution and other sciences are doing, is creating a story of our origin that makes sense to us based on what we believe about ourselves. And that's also what religion is and what spirituality is. It's a story. And essentially what you're asking me, I can't tell if what you're asking me is, does the evolutionary story explain why brains create spiritual and religious stories? Or if you're asking me whether these religious stories have any place in this story that I'm telling, which are two really, really different questions, right?
The second one, yes. That
yeah, okay. And I guess the answer is, I think that both religion and science are ways of making meaning, and they treat observations differently. So spiritual investigation and religious investigation treats human experience, human subjective experience, as valid, as valid as maybe even more valid than, or more important than other types of evidence. But science doesn't do that. Science says, well, it doesn't really matter what we believe about ourselves. The evidence in the genes of neurons suggests that our neurons are pretty much identical to the neurons of lizards and fish and birds. And the way that those neurons configure themselves may be different for some different reasons, but the genetics of the neurons and the genetics of the embryos, of how the embryos produce the neurons, is pretty much the same. Now, a spiritualist or a religious person might look at that and say, well, that doesn't really prove anything. But a scientist would say, no, that actually proves a lot. And a scientist will look at the genetic evidence and say that proves a lot, but they'll look at a mystic's experience and say that doesn't prove anything. It really all comes down to what you think is meaningful evidence to create your story. So I think that the neuroscience that I know actually helps explain why brains create mystical stories and spiritual stories. That doesn't invalidate the value of those stories for helping you through life, but it does suggest that they aren't origin stories in a scientific sense. So it's sort of like trying to blend two meaning systems. Maybe other people are much better than that than I am, but that's sort of my very not satisfying answer to you, I think.
Dor, please, your turn.
Oh. Thank you so much for this lecture. It was fascinating. I have two questions, if that's okay. The first one relates quite strongly to some of the previous questions. But I wanted to ask, since a lot of what we do as historians is to try and understand the experiences and perceptions of people in the past, what sort of questions would you recommend asking about the way people perceive the world? And I was also curious about the sixth C you've mentioned.
Sure. Okay. So it's hard to answer the first question that you asked me without knowing which histories, which cultures you're asking about. So I guess what I would say is this, that one thing we know is that genes aren't the only thing which transmit information from one generation to the next. So does development. So because of the way that human brains develop across 25 years and remain plastic throughout our whole lives to some extent, there's the possibility for behaviors and practices that are regular, that you're regularly exposed to transmit information from one generation to the next. Because ultimately, if we were to stop time right now and just peer inside your brain, what your brain is representing in this moment is what is going on in the context and what is going on inside your own body. And based on that, it's making a set of predictions about what's going to happen next. So if we want to know something about how people feel and what they did and why they did it and maybe what they were thinking, we have to be asking certainly about the external context, which I think historians know maybe better than scientists, frankly. That's like a big, that's like a big light bulb for a lot of scientists. Like, oh, we have to actually consider the context. That's, whereas for you guys, that's like old hat, right? But I would say everyone pretty much ignores the fact that there's an internal context that you carry around with you your whole life. Even scientists, I mean, it's amazing. So scientists will, in brain imaging, they talk about the default state, like when brains are at rest, by which they mean they're not stimulating the brain in some way, but they completely ignore the fact that your brain is still connected to your body. Your body is always sending information to your brain. So your brain is in constant conversation with your body. So the state of, like the state of nutrition, the state of exercise, what people ate. I mean, actually, evolutionary anthropologists think quite a bit about this when they're asking questions about, for example, the transition from hunting and gathering to farming communities or agriculture on a large scale. There were major shifts that happened in nutrients that made brain evolution possible that have nothing to do with genes necessarily, by which I mean to say it's not that genes were driving that change, it's that nutrition was driving that change. Of course, the genes were there to take advantage of that, right? But I think that we could be focusing also somewhat on the physical conditions that people were living in. I think also it's important to realize that we regulate each other's nervous systems in ways that we are largely unaware of, in very, very, very important ways, including by the words that we use. So if you look into the brain, you can see that the systems in the brain that are important for regulating your immune system, your metabolism, your heart, your lungs, all of these things are actually exactly the same neurons which are helping you to speak and understand language. Even in a bird's brain, the systems that control the bird's body are also the systems that allow the bird to learn song and sing. And so what this means is that, we are social animals, and we are the caretakers of each other's nervous systems, whether we like it or not. And so there are many ways that humans have for regulating each other's nervous systems that are embedded in cultural practice, historical practices that we don't pay that much attention to necessarily. So you might be paying attention to it in terms of regulating behaviors, but it's also regulating something more than behaviors. It's regulating actually their physical functioning. And that not everything can't be reduced to that, but that's just one factor that is largely overlooked, I would say. Another thing I think which is really interesting is that, and you can see this across cultures, and so my guess is you can also see this historically, is that, so one way to think about what the brain is doing is it's trying to make sense of these sensations from the body, the sense data, in relation to the context around you. And different cultures have different ways of doing this. And historically, there are also different ways that humans do this. So sometimes we make sense of these sense data as physical symptoms, and sometimes we make sense of them as mental feelings. And it's not like it's not like the tug in your chest that you feel when you're anxious is organically different from the tug that you feel in your chest at the beginning of a heart attack. It's actually very, very similar. The sense data may be different, but what you experience, the sensations you experience are the same, which is why it's very hard to actually, why women more often than men die of heart attacks after leaving an emergency room, because they've been sent away being told that they're anxious instead of actually the beginning of a cardiac event. But I guess my point is that if you look throughout history, especially in the history of emotion, you can see that the way that people are making sense of their own physical sensations differs. And that may be very, very meaningful in terms of it may shed some light on the meaning systems that are being used at a particular historical point in time. Just to answer the last part of your question quickly, when the brain is asking questions about, figuratively speaking, asking questions about sense data, it's not asking what are these, it's asking what are these like? What are these like in my past experience? What was similar to this? In psychology, a group of things which are similar is a category. And a mental representation of a category is a concept. So what your brain is really doing all the time is using past experience to construct concepts which are used predictively to make sense, to guide action and make sense of sense data and create your experience. So concepts are the sixth C. Concepts arise from the 5 C's, including compression. They make abstract concepts possible. By abstract, I don't necessarily mean that they are amodal, that they have no sensory consequence. What I mean by that is that things which look different and smell different and sound different they have different physical properties. As long as they serve the same function, we can understand them as being conceptually similar. That's what abstraction is.
Okay. And the honor for the very last question goes to Roy. Go ahead, Roy, please.
Thank you. I regret to say the last word, but you will say the last word. Thank you very much for a fascinating talk. I'm working on Eastern conception, Indian mostly, conception of emotions, and their concepts loom great in creating emotions and anticipating them. And it's clear that there is nothing like natural kinds of emotions or specific imprints for emotion, culturally at least. My question to you is, you showed an overwhelming plasticity of the brain, right, which can be rewired by using concepts and therefore can be manipulated at will. And this goes both ways. It can educate people and it can contribute to their welfare, but it can also indoctrinate them through concepts. And you undermine, on the other hand, the notion of a rational brain or a brain that has, let's say, kind of, Chomskyan view of generic grammar, let's say, or any kind of understanding of something that is hardwired in the brain and therefore turn people into liberal democratic beings. So the question is, given the overwhelming plasticity of the brain, what kind of in your understanding, what room is there for ethics under that view? I mean, what would be the ethical principle to work with brains and under these circumstances? I think you mentioned it a little bit when you spoke about solidarity, right? And the way that we are responsible for each other's brain. But
yeah, so let me just say, first of all, I did not really undermine the idea of a rational brain. I'm undermining the definition of rationality as the absence of emotion. So I'm in no way am I saying that humans can't be rational. I'm just saying that that the idea that rationality is defined by the absence of passion or the absence of emotion or the absence of affect is just biologically wrong. It's not plausible. So that story doesn't work, but that doesn't mean that rationality doesn't exist. It just means that rationality has to be understood in a different way. And actually there is some evidence, there is some work, I would say, attempting to address that issue. Work by Tom Griffiths at Princeton. There was a nice paper in Behavioral and Brain Sciences about that. We contributed a commentary to that about, that rationality, and this is something I talk about in one of the lessons of 7.5 lessons. If I thought about it for a minute, I could tell you which one, but it's a short book, so you can't miss it. It's very easy to find. I'm also not saying that nothing is hardwired. Well, I mean, hardwired. Nothing is hardwired because brains aren't soldered to, neurons aren't soldered together. So that's, but I'm not saying that there are that everything, that you are a blank slate. This is not a Rousseauian notion of like everything is learned. You certainly come into the world with some stuff you're prepared with.
It's workable, right?
I'm sorry, say again?
Sorry, it's workable, right?
It's malleable. It's malleable, yeah. And even, I would say, if you look at ecological and ethological science, you can see that even what we think of as hardwired reflexes are flexible to context. A larval zebrafish, which is 2 hours old, has a menu of options to deal with a looming object. So depending on the context, the animal can execute one behavior over another. So clearly in 2 hours, that animal hasn't had a lot of opportunity to learn, but still there's flexibility, even in reflexes, I would say. So I think to some extent, our notion of what it means to say something is hardwired and what it means to say that something is a reflex and so on. It's not that we come into the world like a blank slate. It's not like we come in unprepared, but the way that we understand hardwired and reflexes and so on, I think is just, that has to be adjusted. But to your question, I would say, I think this understanding of the brain actually directly bears on ethics. And in fact, I wrote 7.5 lessons the way that I wrote it, precisely for the purpose of getting people to think a little bit about what kind of person they want to be. Because it doesn't really matter. Look, there are some meaning systems, some cultures which are very collectivistic, and people are very, their behaviors are very, very intertwined, and they're very dependent on each other. And there are rules, there are strict rules for behavior. And then there are more individualistic cultures, right? That that prize individual rights and freedoms. And I live in a culture which prizes individual rights and freedoms, where it is considered unpatriotic to even raise the issue that we have socially dependent nervous systems. I could tell you a story about receiving so much hate mail from the alt-right that 2 police forces had to get involved and had to surveil my office and my house for many months because of the threats that I received and my family received, merely because I just raised the issue, right? I didn't come down and say anything about abolishing free speech. In fact, the things I was talking about didn't even have anything to do with free speech, but it's seen as very, very, very threatening. And my feeling is that we can ignore the fact that we have socially dependent nervous systems, but we will pay a price for that. And we might not pay a price for that right now in the immediate, but we eventually will pay that price. We are free to do and say as we want for the most part, but we are not free from the consequences of what we say and do. And so I actually think that, I have very strong opinions about this, but I try really hard to, take my lab coat off when I have that discussion, because I think as a scientist, my job is not to tell people what their ethical and moral responsibilities are. My job is only to communicate my best understanding of what the science is and introduce them to the range of things that they might want to be thinking about without telling them exactly what to think. And I think the only place where but of course I have opinions, right? But I think we are the caretakers of each other's nervous systems. The words we speak actually do affect people in very, very biological ways. And at some point, we have to have a conversation about that as a culture, or maybe even globally. I think the one place where I feel strongly enough where I feel more, I allow myself to be more prescriptive is when it comes to children. I think, you know, separating children from their caregivers and in general, childhood poverty should be eradicated. The only reason to separate a child from her caregiver is because the caregiver is abusive. And childhood poverty leaves its mark on brain development in ways that are irrevocable and are, you know, trying to argue this, at least in the United States, on moral grounds is a losing battle. But arguing it on the basis of human capital and economic grounds may actually be a winning a conversation to have, because it's just a colossal waste of, it's a colossal waste of human capital. And it's a colossal waste of an opportunity to put an end to hatred and conflict that has been going on for generations by caring for the children of the next generation. And so I would say, I'd be happy to have that conversation, but I usually try to have it in separate circumstances from the conversation about the science itself. Because all the science really says is that certain things are biological realities. What we do with that reality and how those, you know, how that plays out over time is really up for grabs, I would say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is a very important note that we have. It is our responsibility to speak, and we need to take responsibility of what we speak. I think this is a very important lesson for everyone. And this is an important note where we can end our discussion today. Please join me in saying thank you to Professor Barrett for joining us today and also showing us a lesson how to preserve despite Zoom difficulties. So thank you very much to you, Professor Barrett, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, happy Hanukkah, stay well, stay safe, and we'll be here again in 2 weeks' time in another For Rouben session. So good night, good morning, and hello, bye-bye.
And thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for your patience at the beginning. You know, like I said, that's never happened before, but I really appreciate you hanging in there with me, and happy Hanukkah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.